So in the meantime, hospitals are assessing their stocks and prioritising the use of Ben-Pen for the most sickest patients.
I'm sure that's the most bestest course of action, Candice. Welcome to Media Watch. I'm Jonathan Holmes. First tonight to ABC News 24. A few months ago, I rather cruelly dubbed the ABC's round-the-clock news channel ABC News 12 because overnight and at weekends it's only half the news service it promised to be. One of the big international stories of the last couple of weeks was Palestine's bid for full membership of the United Nations as a sovereign state. At around 2:15 last Saturday morning, ABC News 24 started running the BBC's coverage of the speech to the UN General Assembly by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
This will be an historic moment for the Middle East peace process and for the Palestinians.
Excellencies, the question of Palestine is intricately linked with the United Nations.
To be honest, it wasn't the most riveting television, but it was definitely news, happening live, and as viewer Michael Addis told Media Watch, there isn't much free-to-air competition at that time of night.
All those digital channels, basically after 1 a.m, move on to home shopping.
So Mr. Addis was enjoying the historic speech. As the clock ticked towards 2:30, Mr. Abbas was speaking about his predecessor, Yasser Arafat.
He urged the United Nations to realise the inalienable national rights of the Palestinians.
Enjoy a morning coffee with a mix of the week's policies and press conferences.
Uh-oh, time for some promos.
On Foreign Correspondent. It's the global...
Lots of promos.
Settle in for a captivating new season of feature-length docos on ABC2.
And after that, for The World This Week with Tony Eastley. And what was the first story Tony's Weekly Digest dealt with?
UN meetings in New York can be tedious affairs, but this week there was extra frisson when it became clear that the Palestinian delegation was there to make waves and to push for a vote on statehood.
But Tony, we were there. We were watching Mr. Abbas do it. And now you're in the way. Michael Addis is deeply unimpressed.
Someone should turn this silly channel off and save the taxpayers some money.
At least ABC News 24's Gavin Morris is up front.
We made an error. We do have staff rostered on at that time, and part of their role is to make editorial decisions on news events. On this occasion, we should have continued with the BBC coverage, and we didn't.
Just to make matters worse, Sky News did stick with Mr. Abbas. Oh well, at 2 a.m, ABC News 24's viewers probably number a few thousand. The Friday before last, at around 9 p.m, over 1 million avid rugby league fans were glued to Channel 9 for the preliminary final between Manly and Brisbane. And afterwards, we received a rain of angry emails here at Media Watch.
The NRL finals is no place for propaganda. I consider it absolutely disgraceful.
I personally do not turn on the NRL coverage to listen to political opinions.
Surely we ought to be able to sit and watch a footy match without being bludgeoned by partisan political propaganda.
What were they on about? Well, listen to Ray Warren's commentary as the Manly Sea Eagles ran out for the second half.
The Eagles are rocking. Not only has the Manly Football Club been doing great work on the field this season, they've also been very busy working with the community off the field. With significant funding from the Manly League Club and Harbour Diggers, but they are under threat from the new untested technology the federal government plans to introduce.
There was a lot more in the same vein, though Ray never explained what technology he was talking about. Instead, he told his viewers...
So for more information, go to won'tworkwillhurt.com.au.
That website, of course, is all about opposing the government's proposed mandatory pre-commitment policy for poker machines.
Gillard's laws won't help problem gamblers.
If you look very carefully, you'll see that it's...
Authorised by W. Krell for Clubs Australia.
Back at the footy, Warren's fellow commentator, the legendary Phil Gus Gould, had joined in.
Yeah, the proposed mandatory pre-commitment that they've put forward is a rubbish policy. It won't work. It won't solve the problem they say they're going to target. I've never seen a more stupid policy in all my life.
That's an endorsement.
It certainly was. Between them, Warren and Gould carried on for nearly 2 minutes. We asked media analyst Steve Allen how much Clubs Australia would have had to pay to buy that sort of endorsement. He responded,
"The airtime alone is worth around $155,000. Given it is editorial, we would value it at 2 to 3 times that."
So, getting on for $500,000 worth of endorsement. But it seems it was given away for free. Clubs Australia spokesman Jeremy Barth told 2SM,
"That certainly wasn't paid for by the industry. That was Channel 9 and the NRL lending their support."
In a letter released this morning addressed to Nine CEO David Gyngell, Senator Nick Xenophon and MP Andrew Wilkie complained that Nine has breached, among others, this clause of the Commercial Television Industry Code of Practice.
A commercial or community service announcement must be readily distinguishable by viewers from program material.
But in response to an earlier complaint, Nine's Network Compliance Manager, there's a title for you, wrote this last week.
The comments relating to the federal government proposed poker machine tax were purely the opinions of the commentators regarding matters directly affecting the NRL community.
Poker machine tax? Someone at Nine's been on the Kool-Aid or listening to their former boss, Eddie Maguire. There is no proposed poker machine tax, and no footy tax either. But the letter went on.
The comments were part of the program content and were in no way an advertisement. Furthermore, the Nine network did not receive any payment or other benefits for the broadcast of the information. For the reasons outlined above, I believe we have complied with our industry code of practice.
Amazingly, I reckon she may be right. There's nothing in the code that I can see to stop football commentators spouting whatever nonsense they want. No doubt the regulator ACMA will give us a ruling eventually. Meanwhile, it wasn't just Nine last week, but most of the Australian mainstream media that allowed itself to be spun by the opponents of poker machine reform. That same Friday morning on Nine's Today programme, former Nine boss and AFL heavyweight Eddie Maguire weighed into the argument.
I'm the president of the Collingwood Football Club and we have significant holdings in the poker machine industry. There will be a meeting on Monday between the AFL presidents and the AFL, a scheduled meeting, but on the agenda is this pokey situation.
The next day, News Limited political reporter Samantha Maiden was working the phones. Her story ran in News Limited's Sunday papers. Predictably, it was Sydney's Sunday Telegraph that spun it hardest.
Footy pokies revolt. Samantha Maiden. Rugby League and the AFL have formed a powerful alliance, launching a full frontal assault against the Gillard government's plans to curb the use of poker machines. The NRL and the AFL will use Grand Final week in both codes to derail Julia Gillard's support for poker machine reforms.
Actually, I doubt, despite the byline, that Samantha Maiden wrote those lead pars. Her full story on page 7 was much more accurate.
Julia Gillard faces a revolt by the NRL, powerful AFL clubs and her own backbench over the poker machine reforms that could kill her government.
Powerful AFL clubs is not the same as the AFL. But the front page report in the telly of a formal NRL-AFL alliance was manna from heaven for Clubs Australia. That morning it issued a media release.
AFL and NRL reject Wilkie's footy tax.
Clubs Australia has welcomed the decision of the AFL and its clubs to speak out against the mandatory pre-commitment technology on poker machines.
That Sunday afternoon, Australian Associated Press put one of its Canberra-based political reporters onto the story. And Lisa Martin really set the hairs running.
AFL joins NRL in Pokies revolt. A cashed-up alliance of rival footy codes has joined Clubs Australia's fight against the federal government's poker machine reforms. During Grand Final week, the AFL and NRL are planning to run television advertisements against mandatory pre-commitment technology for high-intensity pokies.
Martin based her story, we're told, on the Clubs Australia media release, informed by the News Limited story. She tried but failed to contact someone from the AFL, AAP told us. The stuff about TV ads ready to run in Grand Final week was
a misinterpretation of the planned public campaign by the Codes, linked to Nine's efforts during the TV commentary of the finals.
Make sense to you? Me neither. In any case, it was fantasy. That afternoon, about 15 other journalists did manage to contact AFL media manager Patrick Keane. His mobile number is no secret. Was there a formal alliance with Clubs Australia, a campaign with the NRL, and an advertising campaign for Grand Final week, they asked.
I told them no, no and no.
And he resorted to Twitter.
For anyone in any doubt, the AFL is not starting a campaign this week around proposed pokey legislation. Any suggestion to that is incorrect.
But it seems he was wasting his time. That evening on ABC News in Victoria.
Power play, the AFL to join the NRL in the battle to block poker machine reform.
And on 7 News.
The NRL and AFL have joined forces to tackle the federal government's pokey reforms, launching a new campaign ahead of this week's grand finals.
Next morning, a page 3 story in The Age under the byline of
Mark Metherell
repeated the AAP's misinterpretation about an ad campaign.
During Grand Final week, the AFL and NRL are planning to run television advertisements against mandatory pre-commitment technology for high-intensity pokies.
And so did a story in The Australian, ostensibly by
Sid Marr.
Rowan Callick. AFL club presidents meet today to discuss a Grand Final week television advertising campaign against the reform deal for mandatory pre-commitment of poker machines.
But Metherell, Marr and Callick all tell us that they didn't write anything about ad campaigns. What happens is that sub-editors see the AAP copy, reckon the journos have missed the best lead, and insert it into their stories. Great system, isn't it? AAP may not be a household name, but it's one of the most influential news outlets in the country. When it gets a story wrong, so does everyone else. Finally, that afternoon, Andrew Demetriou of the AFL held a press conference. He was opposed to mandatory pre-commitment, he said, but
the AFL is not involved in any campaign, it hasn't got any ads ready to go, and it's just been appalling the way this has been covered, and we're about to launch some campaign with Clubs Australia. The fellow from Clubs Australia, I don't even know his name, but please stop talking on our behalf. Just shut up.
Too late. Thanks to some swift footwork by Clubs Australia and some shoddy journalism by AAP and its trusting clients, the anti-pokey reform campaign had garnered free publicity worth even more than the $500,000 worth it had been gifted by Nine. You can bet we'll be back next week, but please, as Ray Warren likes to say, bet responsibly. Until then, good night.